Neither fleeing overseas nor changing their names, former high-ranking Nazis couldn't escape Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service that hunted them down in the post-war decades. Mossad's #1 target was Adolf Eichmann, known as the architect of the Holocaust. He was tracked down only 15 years after he fled. Eichmann hid very far away, and very well as it seemed. In this WAZ video, we'll recall one of the most brilliant Mossad operations, the capture of Adolf Eichmann. You'll learn how Israeli intelligence service managed to identify a humble Argentinian clerk as a notorious Nazi, why Eichmann's capture required a fictitious travel agency and a car crash, and finally, what did the new documents, declassified only in the 21st century, tell about the fugitive Eichmann? Otto Adolf Eichmann, born March 19, 1906. In 1932, he joined the Austrian branch of the Nazi Party and the SS. In 1935, he joined the newly established SD Jewish department and was engaged in the forced immigration of Jews from Germany. In 1941, he became the head of Department IVB-4 in the Reich Security Main Office, involved in the so-called Jewish Affairs and Evacuation, where Eichmann coordinated sending people to ghettos and concentration camps. After the war, Eichmann fled the prisoner of war camp, lived under a false identity in Germany and Austria, and moved to Argentina in the 1950s. In the faraway Latin American country, Eichmann, now known as Ricardo Klement, worked as a clerk in a local Mercedes department. In a couple of years, he moved his wife and 3 sons to Argentina. According to one version, Eichmann had to come back to Europe and marry his wife under a new identity. The family lived modestly in a new place and avoided attention. No one could assume that this unremarkable, bespectacled man was the architect of the Holocaust himself. It was Lothar Hermann who helped the Israelites to track down Eichmann. Hermann was a German Jew, a survivor of the Dachau concentration camp, who managed to flee to South America and settle in Buenos Aires. In the late 1950s, his daughter Sylvia met a young man who boasted that his father was an important Reich official. Hermann shared his suspicions with the Jewish community in Buenos Aires, but he was nearly blind at the time and was not taken seriously. Everything changed in October 1959 when Argentinian German-language newspaper Argentinisches Tageblatt reprinted an interview with Israeli journalist Tovia Friedman. Friedman was the head and the only employee of the Institute of Documentation and Investigation of Nazi War Crimes. Finding Eichmann was almost the meaning of his life, and Friedman promised a $10,000 reward for any helpful information. Hermann wrote to Friedman about his suspicions, and after a while, the journalist put him in contact with Mossad. Former Mossad director Isaac Herro offered another version of events, though. He said that Lothar Hermann contacted not Friedman, but Fritz Bauer, the prosecutor general of the land of Hesse in West Germany. And it was Bauer who passed the information on to the Israelites, having little faith in German justice. One way or another, Mossad got the information and sent their agents to Argentina to thoroughly verify it. The final identification took place the next spring. Observers reported a big party in Ricardo Klement's house on the same day when Otto Adolf and Veronica Katharina Eichmann were to celebrate their silver wedding anniversary. The Israeli government assumed, and not without reason, that the official extradition request would only make Eichmann disappear once more. Not only did Argentina turn a blind eye to Nazi criminals entering the country at the time, but actually helped them to hide and even hired them to the local armed forces. The Israelites would be equally dissatisfied with Eichmann's extradition to Germany, where Nazis were sentenced leniently for the last few years. Nor were they happy with the option to kill Eichmann, because it was important to carry out a public trial. There was only one option. Eichmann's capture, named Operation Finale, was supervised personally by Mossad's director, Isaac Herro. All 30 members of the operation volunteered. Almost all of them either suffered from the Nazis themselves or lost their family in the Holocaust. The Israelites arrived in Buenos Aires separately from different countries and at different times through a fictitious travel agency. There were no regular flights between Argentina and Israel at the time, so it was planned that Eichmann would be moved to Israel on a plane of the official delegation that arrived in Argentina to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the country's independence. On the evening of May 11, 1960, 7 operation members in 2 cars were waiting for Eichmann to come home from work. At last, the man got off the bus and headed towards his house. Agent Peter Malkin called out to him in Spanish. Un momentito, señor. Eichmann turned around and was knocked to the ground. The others pulled him into a car. The whole operation took about 20 seconds. As Malkin later recalled, there were 6 million pairs of eyes staring at me. I was bound to succeed. He became known as the man who captured Eichmann and Agent 740. Eichmann spent the next 9 days in a villa rented by the Israelites in a suburb of Buenos Aires. He named his real name and number of his Nazi party card right away. Members of the task force were strictly forbidden to show any aggression. It was not easy. Even the cook held herself back so as not to poison the captive. All the members of the operation learned another rule. They would be utterly silent about their work in Mossad if the police arrived. Fortunately, the police never came. Nor could Eichmann's family find the villa, though they searched the entire city together with a German community for several days looking for the captive. They had their suspicions about what had happened. One of the search party members offered to bomb an Israeli embassy in response. The other proposed to capture the Israeli ambassador and arrange for an exchange. On the evening of May 20th, Eichmann was heavily sedated and dressed in an Israeli pilot uniform. At the airport of Buenos Aires, Eichmann's escort showed the border guards a passport in the name of Israeli pilot Rafael Arnon. Arnon was a real person. In addition, Mossad agents had arranged a fake car crash the day before so they could explain to the border guards why the man boarded the plane in a semi-conscious state. They had a medical report in addition to the passport, assuring that Eichmann could endure the flight under medical supervision. Eichmann's crimes were investigated in Israel by a special police unit called Bureau 06. The investigation and trial lasted for a year and a half. The indictment consisted of 15 paragraphs, such as crimes against humanity, crimes against the Jewish people, and membership in a criminal organization. The defendant pleaded not guilty to the charges. Eichmann was guarded especially carefully during the process. A lot of people were willing to lynch him. He was brought to the hearing in an armored vehicle and sat behind bulletproof glass during the trial. Prison guards were selected carefully as well. All the food for the prisoner was checked for poison. The death penalty was abolished in Israel in 1954, but for Adolf Eichmann, an exception was made. He was sentenced to death by hanging. The convict and his family petitioned the president of Israel, Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, for clemency. In his petition, Eichmann wrote the same things he was saying during the trial. He said he was not a fanatical anti-Semite and did not decide anything. He was just following his superior's orders. All petitions were quite predictably rejected. On the night of May 31st to June 1st, Eichmann was hanged in a Ramallah city prison. His body was cremated in a specially designed furnace, and his ashes were scattered in the Mediterranean Sea outside Israeli territorial waters. It was the last execution ever performed in the state of Israel. Of course, the operation caused an international scandal. The Argentinian government accused Israel of abduction, demanded to bring their citizen back, recalled their ambassador from Tel Aviv, and filed a complaint to the United Nations Security Council, but to no avail. The official version stated that Eichmann was abducted by unknown Jewish volunteers not in public service. Only in 2005, Mossad officially admitted that their agents stood behind the operation. 5 years earlier, in 2000, an Argentinian president had apologized for the first time on behalf of his country to the victims of the Holocaust for hiding Nazi criminals. Another interesting document appeared in 2006. It turned out that both CIA and Western German intelligence most likely knew Eichmann's new name and his location for several years prior to Mossad, but they concealed the information, worrying that Eichmann would speak out about the Nazi past of those occupying high positions in the Federal Republic of Germany. Operation Finale was the most famous, but not the only Mossad operation intended to punish Nazi criminals. In 1965 in Uruguay, Israeli Secret Service eliminated Herbert Kukers, a collaborator involved in the mass murder of thousands of Latvian Jews. But Eichmann turned out to be the only Nazi criminal from Mossad's list who was successfully put on trial.